Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in Chicago. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. In the winter of 1914, a chill wind howled off Lake Michigan and swept through the narrow streets of Chicago's near west side. A carriage, its wheels crunching on frost-laced cobblestones, delivered Nurse Adelaide Mercer to the rear entrance of a little-known surgical ward at Cook County's new pavilion. The building, still half unfinished, stood dark and silent, save for flickering gas lamps in some corridors. Mercer's first impressions, through a dim oil lamp in her gloved hand, were of soot-dark plaster, narrow hallways, and the distant echo of dripping water in a tiled operating block. In several memos later filed in the Society of Medical History of Chicago's archives, she described the ward as a hushed vault, like a tomb for the living. Adelaide Mercer was 30 years old, with ash-blonde hair usually pinned strictly under her nurse's cap. She came from a modest family in Joliet, Illinois, and had apprenticed under a Dr. Langley in a small sanitarium before being recruited to Cook County. In local papers, she was lauded as steady, precise, no frail nerves when she accepted this difficult post. Yet she arrived with letters of concern, whispers that the surgical pavilion, built hastily that year, had been intended for experimental treatments no one would speak of openly. Townsfolk talked of a prior caretaker who vanished under odd circumstances. A clerk in West Side Registry recalled hearing the name Langdon, whispered in hushed tones among nursing staff. On her first night, Mercer noticed something peculiar. The ward's surgical door was locked from within. Outside, she heard muffled thumps and the scraping of metal on tile, odd for after hours. A porter, dismissed by her questions, muttered, "Don't go sniffing where death walks." A day later, she encountered an unsteady patient whose chart simply read, Case 43E, Unclassified Malady. The man's cries late that night echoed in adjacent rooms, and a sponge, damp with unseen fluid, was found discarded in a corner just outside the operating theater. By early March, reports of disappearing patients surfaced. One was a factory laborer, admitted for a routine tissue excision. By morning, his bed lay empty, and no records showed transfer. Mercer, uneasy, kept a private journal, later confiscated, in which she wrote, "Something hides behind those steel doors. I see instruments that have no name, jars with dark fluid, and the caretaker avoids my glances." She confided to a night shift orderly, "If I look too long at that box against the back wall, I think it stirs." The orderly, a quiet man named O'Connor, only nodded. He too had heard rumors of hidden compartments beneath the floor. After a week, the hospital's head surgeon, Dr. Milton Hayes, arrived from the main building to oversee operations. He was a stern, rotund man with a penchant for statistical reports and medical journals. Hayes insisted the ward remain sealed at night. He blamed missing supplies and the factory laborer on clerical errors. Yet in some budget records preserved in the Society of Medical History of Chicago's collection, there appears a line for unrecorded specimens tied to that ward, entries later crossed out in pen. Mercer later glimpsed Dr. Hayes inspecting a small, locked box in the wall near the theater door before hurrying away when she entered the corridor. By mid-April of 1914, Nurse Adelaide Mercer began to record her days in the margins of discarded patient charts, since her journal had been seized by order of Dr. Hayes. She wrote in a careful, slanted hand, each note small enough to avoid discovery. The first entry of that month mentions the arrival of a new attendant, a man introduced only as Mr. Corbin. No one could say if Corbin was a porter, an orderly, or something else. His presence unsettled even the physicians. He carried no identification, spoke little, and always wore a leather apron stained by use. His eyes, Mercer noted, did not blink in gaslight. Several surviving pages from her notes, now stored at the Chicago Historical Medical Archives, describe Corbin unlocking the sealed theater near midnight with a brass key that she had never seen issued. The lock clicked once, followed by the soft groan of hinges. Afterward, Only the faint hum of the gas burners could be heard. Bayard Holmes, whose psychiatric studies around that period questioned the limits of human experimentation, was reportedly cited in Hayes's lectures about transient life preservation. Mercer remembered hearing Holmes' name in a staff meeting, spoken not with admiration, but fear. Hayes referred to him as the man who almost saw too much. One nurse fainted during that discussion and was transferred by morning with no record of destination. Later that week, a sanitation worker sweeping the corridor claimed he found bloodied gauze stuffed inside the vent of the east wall. He told Mercer quietly, "They keep something alive in there." His statement was entered into the night log, but erased by dawn. Mercer, desperate for evidence, bribed O'Connor with her week's pay to guard the hall, while she inspected the theater herself. She waited until the gas lamps dimmed and the clock struck 2. The brass handle of the door was cold and slick. She pushed it open to Finn, a chill that clung to her skin as though the air itself had been drained of warmth. Metal trays lined the tables, and an odor of iodine mixed with something sweet and rotten filled the space. On a side shelf lay glass jars, labeled only by numbers, 01 through 06, their contents vague, cloudy, and unrecognizable. Beside them, the suspicious wooden box remained against the wall, half-shadowed, large enough for a small child to fit inside. It had no markings save for a single brass hinge and a narrow slit on top, as if meant to breathe. Mercer described hearing a faint ticking from within, followed by a low sound like a sigh. She backed away and closed the door, her heart hammering, yet she noticed something disturbingly human, a strand of dark hair caught under the lid. She left it untouched, but could not sleep that night. The next morning, O'Connor was missing from his post. A memo circulated that he had resigned suddenly, but his paybook was still on the counter. The entry under his name read, "Final unpaid." That afternoon, the matron instructed Mercer to move her quarters to another wing, citing restructuring. She protested, but Hayes overruled her and confiscated her keys. She was told not to discuss the special room again. Her letters to the Nursing Association went unanswered. A single envelope returned to her bore no sender, only a brief note typed in red ink. "Silence keeps you alive." Days turned into weeks, and by early May 1914, the ward had fallen into a rhythm of whispered dread. Nurse Mercer performed her duties mechanically, her eyes avoiding the far corridor where the locked theater sat behind its frosted glass panes. The patients grew fewer. Some were discharged hastily, others vanished between shifts. The cook recalled preparing meals for 20, but delivering trays for only 14. The hospital ledger later showed numbers adjusted in pencil, as if someone corrected reality after the fact. One night a summer storm cracked over the city, thunder rolling across the lakefront like cannon fire. Mercer was stationed near the dispensary when she saw Dr. Hayes escort 2 men in long coats toward the forbidden door. One held a case marked formalin. The other carried what looked like a folded stretcher, stained dark. The door opened briefly, and a flash of lamplight revealed the outline of that same wooden box now moved to the center of the room. When the door shut again, the thunder drowned any further sound. Later, she overheard fragments of conversation in the supply hall, Hayes speaking to Corbin. "The circulatory reaction held for 4 hours," he said. "Holmes would have called it progress." The name jolted Mercer. She remembered Bayard Holmes' lectures rumored to test the border between coma and death. She wondered if Hayes had taken his theories beyond medicine. A nurse named Lillian, assigned briefly to assist Hayes, confided after 2 days, "He makes them breathe twice." When pressed, she refused to explain. Mercer began searching for evidence. She visited the city clerk's office under pretense of requesting salary records, but secretly examined patient transfer forms. She found several marked Research Division, confidential, with no hospital destination, dated over a 2-month span. She copied one name, Arthur Blenning, and traced it to an address in Bridgeport. There the land. Delord told her the man had never returned from treatment. "They sent a crate," he whispered, "said it was his belongings." I opened it to check for papers. Nothing inside but sawdust. Returning to the hospital, Mercer confronted Hayes in his office. He smiled thinly. Curiosity is unbecoming in staff, he said, and fatal in nurses. He handed her a notice of reassignment to another institution upstate, effective immediately. She refused to sign. In that moment, she noticed a folder on his desk labeled Subject Continuation 43E. Inside lay sketches of human organs connected by copper tubes, notations written in meticulous script. Retention of response under induced death. Hayes caught her gaze and closed the folder softly. "You'll forget what you saw," he murmured, "because no one will believe you." That night, Mercer packed her things, but stayed one last time to retrieve her hidden notes. She crept to the theater door around midnight. The lock was gone, removed entirely. Inside, the air was colder than before. The tables were bare except for a single covered shape under a sheet. She lifted the corner and saw not a body, but the wooden box, its lid now open. Whatever had been inside was gone. On the floor beside it lay a surgical mask and a nurse's pin engraved AM. Her own duplicate still hung from her collar. She backed out slowly and noticed footprints leading to the rear exit, each print smudged with what looked like ash. She followed them into the courtyard until they disappeared near the drain. She later wrote, "I think I saw the box breathe before it opened." No one believed her account when she tried to speak. The next morning her quarters were emptied, and the record of Nurse Adelaide Mercer ceased entirely after May 12, 1914. In June of 1914, the surgical pavilion was quietly shut down for what official statements called repairs to the ventilation and drainage systems. Yet rumors swirled across the west side that something had been unearthed beneath its tiled floors. 3 masons hired to remove the foundation later claimed they were told never to speak of what they saw. One, Patrick Malloy, left the city days later and refused his final wages. The remaining 2 described a cavity the size of a cellar lined with metal racks and pipes that led upward toward the operating room. They mentioned a single object hauled out under canvas by Corbin and Hayes, a crate shaped suspiciously like the wooden box Nurse Mercer had described. No official report documented this removal, but in a maintenance ledger found decades later, the line Equipment Disposal, 1 container, biological hazard, was entered and then blacked out with thick ink. The press of the time made no mention of the closure. Chicago's newspapers were consumed by wartime news from Europe. Only a small paragraph in the Tribune City section noted irregularities at County Hospital Surgical Wing. Bayard Holmes, whose work had grown controversial by then, was mentioned as having advised on possible containment protocols. That brief note vanished from later printings of the paper. A constable named Ernest Bell was sent to inventory the abandoned ward. His written account, now preserved in county archives, describes a pervasive smell of ether and rust, and records that one of the walls showed clear signs of recent reconstruction. Behind a panel he found several thin glass slides numbered sequentially but bearing no samples. Each slot was marked with a patient code corresponding to those missing transfer forms from earlier months. Bell's notes ended with a single line. The caretaker's quarters empty, bed unslept since April. When asked about this entry, he stated, "The key he found on the table did not match any hospital door." Bell resigned 2 weeks later after a fall from a streetcar broke his leg. His partner later claimed Bell was haunted by the sound of breathing in closed spaces. By late summer, a few remaining staff were reassigned to different facilities. Their testimonies would surface years later before the county medical board. A nurse named Cora Delaney recalled hearing Dr. Hayes arguing with administrators that his methods were misunderstood. He wanted to carry on Holmes's vision, she testified, to push the body's limits beyond death itself. Delaney admitted burning a stack of records at Hayes's request the night before inspectors arrived. She wept, recalling the smell that rose from the furnace. When the building finally reopened in 1916 under a new name, its east wing was bricked off completely. The official blueprint labeled the sealed section as storage. No further mention of Nurse Mercer appeared in hospital archives except a small notation in payroll. Position vacated. Reason unknown. The caretaker's file, once indexed under Langdon and later Corbin, was missing entirely. A janitor decades later claimed that on stormy nights, the air vents along the east wall exhaled warm mist smelling faintly of iodine and something sweeter. He said he heard a woman's voice murmuring numbers 01 through 06, repeated softly until the lights flickered off. The case was forgotten for years, until in 1938 a graduate student researching early surgical ethics found correspondence between Bayard Holmes and an unnamed Cook County physician. The letters spoke of subjects who refuse cessation and warned that continuation beyond purpose is unnatural. The student's paper was never published. He died of pneumonia before completion. His notes mention one phrase circled twice. The caretaker remains. In 1917, 3 years after the last known reference to Nurse Mercer, a brief memorandum circulated within the Cook County medical offices, signed by Interim Superintendent Dr. Alfred R. Cleary. It stated simply, Pavilion B to remain closed, pending safety review. But rumors among attendants persisted. Night porters refused to walk the east corridor, claiming the sound of running water echoed there even when the pipes were shut off. One orderly swore he saw candlelight behind the bricked arch near the old operating theater. He resigned the next morning without notice. When Cleary ordered the removal of leftover equipment from the sealed rooms, the men reported a dense film of dust and something like soot coating the walls. Embedded within it were faint outlines of hands, as if pressed from within. Decades later, a young intern would recall Cleary's remark, "Whatever they were curing, it wasn't the living." Around this time, Bayard Holmes continued his advocacy for mental hygiene and reform, publicly distancing himself from experimental rumors, yet his earlier correspondence haunted the profession. A note preserved in a private collection quotes him lamenting, "Those who twist inquiry into industry." Scholars now wonder if he referred to Hayes's secret project. Holmes's influence nonetheless remained. Several of his pupils were employed at Cook County before the closure, and his theories on suspended vitality had quietly entered medical conversation. Mercer's name reappeared in one 1918 letter between two of those doctors. If the Mercer notes still exist, they prove both the success and the sin. The envelope bore no return address and was filed anonymously in archives under unverified. By 1920, the ward's structure had deteriorated. The city authorized demolition of part of the east foundation. Workmen breaking concrete found beneath a section of pipe an iron tag stamped 43E. They reported a hollow sound when striking near it. The foreman ordered that corner filled immediately, calling it unstable ground. Soon after, one worker fell ill with fever and raved that he saw a woman in a nurse's cap watching him from the shadows of the pit before fainting. He died 2 days later of infection, though no wound was visible. The rumor spread fast enough that the site foreman paid for a priest to bless the area, though the church never confirmed performing such a rite. A decade later, the hospital underwent renovation under new management. Young interns tasked with clearing out storerooms found a trunk of old patient files damp with mold. Among them lay a small envelope sealed in wax. Inside was a scrap of cloth bearing the initials AM and a single copper key whose teeth matched no existing lock. A typed note accompanied it. Return to the caretaker. The interns, unaware of the tale's depth, handed it to an administrator who dismissed it as a prank. The key vanished the following day. The administrator reportedly began suffering sleeplessness and requested reassignment within a month. By the late 1930s, Chicago's medical historians began referencing the caretaker myth in lectures on ethics and lost cases. The account of Nurse Adelaide Mercer resurfaced only in fragments, snippets of her handwriting preserved by archivists, blurred photographs of the surgical wing before demolition, and oral retellings by surviving staff who swore the air near the east wall remained unnaturally cold, even in July. Some said that on quiet nights the old pipes groaned as if something still moved behind them, slow, measured, breathing. By 1941, the war had turned attention away from forgotten corners of Chicago's institutions, but for archivists like Thomas Riley, the sealed pavilion remained a curiosity. Riley was tasked with cataloging old medical equipment for scrap drives. He found that Pavilion B's records were incomplete. Shipment logs began mid-1914 and ended abruptly that autumn. One entry listed, "Mechanical Heart Assistance Prototype, Testing Incomplete." Intrigued, Riley traced the signature to Dr. Milton Hayes, who had supposedly drowned off the coast of Michigan in 1919. No body had been recovered. Riley's supervisor advised him to leave the matter be, yet he filed a private memorandum noting that the handwriting on the 1914 ledger differed from Hayes's known script, as if another hand had practiced the signature. While sorting through storage, he discovered a crate mislabeled as "obsolete instruments." Inside lay rusted clamps, glass vials labeled with faded numbers, and a narrow metal mask shaped to fit over the lower face. The smell of formaldehyde clung to the cloth wrapping. Riley documented it, locked it in a storeroom, and made one remark in the margin. If Mercer's story was fiction, this box is its punctuation. Rumors of the evil caretaker legend resurfaced among orderlies after a janitor claimed to see a woman's figure through frosted glass on the bricked wall at dusk. He described her uniform as spotless, despite decades of dust. His co-workers mocked him until one evening the brick surface itself appeared damp, as though something pressed from the other side. When they returned with lanterns, the moisture had vanished. Leading physicians dismissed the talk, yet reports of missing tools increased, scalpels left in locked drawers gone by morning. A night guard swore he heard soft humming in an empty corridor. His report filed the next day bore a shaky signature. Bayard Holmes's writings were cited again that year in a medical journal debating early life extension experiments. A columnist alluded to unsupervised applications of Holmesian doctrine at Cook County circa 1914, prompting older staff to exchange uneasy glances. Riley later recalled overhearing two doctors whisper if Hayes had succeeded, he wouldn't need saving. The implication chilled him. He began to suspect the caretaker legend masked an actual continuation of Hayes's research, perhaps by an assistant still alive under another name. Riley noted that the supply manifests from the 1920s included purchases of formalin, ether, and refrigeration coils, materials unnecessary for a defunct wing. In 1943, a partial blackout drill forced engineers to inspect emergency generators located near the sealed section. They reported a faint electrical hum audible through the wall, even when power was cut to the entire floor. Riley accompanied them out of curiosity and placed his hand on the bricks. He felt warmth pulsing intermittently like a slow heartbeat. He returned the next day and found the wall cold, but a thin line of soot traced the mortar joints downward to a floor grate. He followed it and discovered the grate led to a tunnel sealed with new cement. His final memo, dated June 12, 1943, ends abruptly. Audible rhythm resumed tonight. Sounds female. Riley failed to report for duty the next morning. Only his cap and a half-burned notebook were found in the corridor outside Pavilion B. By 1946, the hospital administration ordered Pavilion B permanently condemned, but demolition crews hesitated. Some refused to enter after hearing rhythmic tapping from inside the sealed corridor. Engineers who checked the structure confirmed that no pipes ran through that section anymore, yet the tapping persisted irregularly, like a coded knock. One foreman claimed he deciphered a pattern, 6 slow strikes, 1 pause, then another 6, mirroring the numbers Mercer had once whispered in her journal. Officials dismissed it as coincidence, but they increased the guards at night. The caretaker legend began to circulate again among staff newly returned from war. Veterans compared the eerie sound to Morse code used in prisoner camps, and some joked that the nurse was still reporting for duty. During this period, a young resident named Dr. Lydia Farrell became fascinated with the archives. She was one of few women physicians in the facility and skeptical of ghost tales. Yet as she compiled an internal history, she stumbled upon an old photograph marked Pavilion B, 1914. The image showed a group of nurses and doctors posed stiffly before the theater door. At the far edge stood a woman, half in shadow, her face blurred by motion. Farrell enlarged the print and noticed the faint outline of a wooden box near her feet. Her curiosity led her to the county records office, where she found an unsigned death certificate for female, approx 30 years, unclaimed body, transfer from county hospital. The date, May 13, 1914, one day after Mercer's last entry. Farrell discussed her findings with Dr. Edwin Clem, a senior pathologist who recalled his mentor once referencing Hayes's folly. He told her that Bayard Holmes had denounced Hayes privately before leaving teaching, warning colleagues to seal away what defies expiration. Clem admitted he had read a surviving Hayes note describing an induced stasis experiment then caretakers as conduits. He burned it after reading, but remembered the phrase precisely. Farrell pressed him for details. He refused further comment and left the project. 3 days later, he was found collapsed in his office, death attributed to heart failure. His secretary reported hearing faint breathing sounds moments before discovering the body, though no one else was present. Farrell persisted nonetheless. She obtained permission to accompany the demolition survey in 1947, hoping to verify the supposed sub-basement. The crew removed part of the east wall and uncovered a small recess behind the bricks. At its center rested a metallic container covered in soot, resembling a medical cabinet. Written in chalk on its lid were the faded letters AM, the same initials as Mercer's. She insisted on documenting it before removal. The workers pried it open to reveal only a cracked porcelain mask and dried residue resembling hair. The air that escaped was warm and smelled faintly of ether. One laborer vomited immediately and refused to continue. Farrell collected fragments and sealed them in label jars for study, but that night her laboratory caught fire, destroying nearly everything. The cause was listed as electrical, despite the power having been disconnected for inspection. The next morning, the remaining wall of Pavilion B collapsed inward without warning, crushing the site entirely. City inspectors declared the ground unstable and ordered it filled with concrete. No further construction was allowed on that parcel. A few surviving nurses later testified they saw white cloth fluttering beneath the rubble as though something had moved before the collapse. No official investigation followed. The caretaker legend slipped again into silence, yet older staff swore the faint tapping could still be heard through the new concrete when the hospital corridors grew quiet enough. By 1951, the new hospital administration had nearly forgotten Pavilion B entirely. But archivists working in the basement stumbled upon a locked filing drawer whose tag had corroded away. Inside were brittle folders stamped Restricted County Research Division. Most were empty, yet one contained 6 glass negatives wrapped in paper. When held to the light, they revealed blurred images of surgical tables, a standing nurse, and a box-shaped outline beside her. Faint handwriting on the edge of one plate read, Sequence 06, Post-Response. The archivist, Harold Wynne, photographed the set for preservation and sent them to the University of Illinois Medical Department for analysis. 2 days later, the negatives vanished from the parcel before arrival. Wynne was questioned and released. Within a week, he resigned, citing recurring nightmares of corridors with no doors. In his notebook, he left a final line. I think she looked at me from inside the film. At that same time, a retired physician named Dr. Silas Morrow delivered a lecture on early experimental ethics and referenced the unsolved Mercer case. He recalled attending a seminar by Bayard Holmes in 1915 where the subject of suspended circulation arose. Holmes had warned that the heart can be silenced yet not stopped. What follows may forget how to die. Morrow told colleagues that a pupil of Holmes had worked under Hayes at Cook County, which reignited speculation that Mercer's disappearance was tied to continuation of those studies. Newspapers briefly revisited the legend under headlines like The Evil Caretaker Returns, but editorial pressure kept the story short. Official hospital spokesman dismissed it as superstition born of wartime anxiety and Hollywood influence. In 1953, city engineers widening Harrison Street struck the old foundation of Pavilion B with a pneumatic drill. Workers reported the drill bit piercing an air pocket that exhaled a wave of chemical odor described as sweet decay. Moments later, the compressor failed entirely, and one laborer suffered convulsions. He recovered, but claimed he heard a woman humming through the machinery, an old lullaby repeated between bursts of static. Investigators blamed carbon exposure, yet when the concrete plug was examined, it showed hair-fine cracks through which warm air escaped intermittently for hours. Equipment placed near the site recorded faint rhythmic pulses consistent with slow breathing. The report was sealed under Municipal Code 74A and never published. Local folklore took over where documentation stopped. Children in the neighborhood began daring each other to press their ears to the hospital's east wall, saying they could hear the nurse counting. One janitor recounted that when he mopped that hallway, the floor sometimes vibrated softly, as if someone on the other side were walking in step with him. Each vibration ended after 6 beats. A group of medical interns in 1956 held a prank séance in the basement to impress visiting students. They lit candles near the old foundation and recited names from patient rosters. Several minutes in, the candles flickered out simultaneously, and one student collapsed screaming that something cold grabbed my wrist. Security expelled them, but 2 participants later withdrew from the program, both citing identical dreams of a nurse holding a box and whispering numbers into their ears. The administration hushed the story to protect the hospital's reputation. By the late 1950s, the county quietly removed all reference to Pavilion B from internal directories. However, the concrete there remained warmer than the rest of the subfloor by several degrees, as recorded in maintenance logs. The last notation in those records, dated 1959, reads, "Sound returns, female tone, interval 6. No signature follows, only a smudge that might once have been a fingerprint." By 1961, the old Cook County complex had grown into a sprawling maze of additions and annexes, yet beneath its modern wards, the shadow of Pavilion B still lingered. A team of electricians rerouting cables discovered a narrow maintenance corridor bricked on one end but hollow-sounding when struck. The foreman authorized removal of a few bricks to check for air pockets. Behind them lay a void less than 2 feet deep, lined with scorched tiles and a rusted metal tag stamped Hayes Unit. Inside the space sat a single object, a small copper key fused to the floor by oxidation. It matched the description of the one found in 1930s archives labeled "Return to the Caretaker." The discovery caused momentary curiosity, then silence. The supervisor ordered the wall resealed and the paperwork lost in a shuffle of requisitions. Only one worker kept a memento, a sketch of the key's teeth drawn on his glove. That glove was later found in his locker after he failed to return from night shift. A new hospital director, Dr. William Rogan, commissioned a historical summary of the facility's origins. The assigned researcher, Louise Denham, approached the project like any archivist until she began tracing payroll anomalies from 1914 onward. She noticed that a caretaker position remained open but continually funded through the 1920s under different employee numbers. The final entry in 1939 listed A. Mercer as recipient, though no such employee existed. Denham thought it clerical duplication until she examined signatures on old requisitions, each marked by a distinctive downward stroke identical across decades. She brought her findings to Rogan, who dismissed them with irritation and warned her not to pursue legends. Bayard Holmes's legacy appeared again that year in a university symposium discussing early medical ethics. Professor Merrick summarized Holmes's warnings about unchecked experimentation and quoted his PHR, "Ace, seal away what defies expiration." Reporters later linked that sentiment to the Mercer story, reviving public interest in what tabloids now called the Devil Nurse of Chicago. Rogan was forced to issue statements denying any such figure had ever existed, yet old employees quietly confirmed hearing whispers near the east wall after midnight. Maintenance men swore the power meters fluctuated even when circuits were off, as though something drew current unseen. In 1963, a janitor named Samuel Reed vanished while cleaning sub-level corridors. His cart was discovered beside the sealed concrete plug, and a faint indentation resembling a handprint was visible in the dust on the wall. Reed's wife told investigators he had complained for weeks about a nurse following me in reflection. His case remained unsolved. Officially, he was listed as absconded employee. 2 months later, hospital electricians reported a sudden power surge localized beneath the east wing that caused every bulb in the old stairwell to flare white for a moment, then die. When they replaced the wiring, they found the copper lines twisted inward toward the foundation as if magnetized. Denham resigned her research post soon after, claiming exhaustion. Her final note filed in the project folder contained only a single typed sentence: "The caretaker still draws pay." She later moved out of the city and was never interviewed again. The file disappeared from records by 1965. By the end of the decade, construction began on a new building atop the site. The old foundations were drilled and reinforced with steel columns. Drillers complained that their bits dulled faster there than anywhere else. One foreman said the ground vibrated like lungs exhaling. When the concrete pour was completed, workers heard faint knocking beneath the wet surface exactly 6 times before silence returned. The clock in the yard struck midnight at that moment, though it had been broken for months. By 1970, the new facility towered above the old county grounds, a modern steel frame promising progress and efficiency. Yet those who worked night shifts in the lower levels often spoke of a lingering dampness along the east foundation corridor where Pavilion B had once stood. The janitors called it the sweating wall. They said the concrete sometimes exhaled a fine mist visible under fluorescent lights, leaving faint circular stains like fingerprints. Several maintenance reports mentioned unexplained corrosion on new metal fixtures installed nearby. Each case closed with the notation, "Environmental cause unverified." During renovations that year, an engineering intern named Paul Hennessy discovered a sealed manila envelope wedged behind an old breaker box. It contained a faded photograph of the 1914 surgical staff and a small clipping from a local newspaper quoting Dr. Milton Hayes about bridging the breath between life and death. On the back, someone had written in pencil, "She still counts." Hennessy filed it away as a curiosity, but within weeks he began sleeping at his desk, complaining of hearing numbers whispered through the ducts. When colleagues teased him, he laughed it off until one morning his chair was found empty and his boots sat neatly by the maintenance hatch leading toward the old subfloor. The hatch had been locked from the inside. Hospital administrators continued to dismiss these accounts. Yet an internal memo from 1972, obtained later by investigative reporter June Mallory, acknowledged persistent acoustic anomalies under the east sector. Mallory sought historical context and uncovered fragments of correspondence between Bayard Holmes and Cook County officials in 1914, referencing non-classified surgical developments. She published a small article titled, "The Evil Caretaker Returns to County," briefly describing the vanished nurse and the mysterious box buried beneath the wards. The story drew attention for a week before hospital lawyers demanded retraction, citing defamation and patient privacy violations. The retraction ran in fine print, but late-night radio hosts repeated the legend, and callers claimed to have relatives who worked there in the cursed wing. One evening, Mallory received an unmarked parcel at her apartment. Inside lay an aged nurse's cap, yellowed and stiff, along with a note typed on carbon paper. "You printed half a truth. The caretaker serves still." She took the package to police, who dismissed it as a hoax. Yet the cap's fabric was tested and dated to the early 20th century. Traces of ether and formaldehyde lingered in the fibers, consistent with hospital preservation chemicals. The sample later went missing from the evidence locker. By mid-decade, the hospital underwent another modernization, and contractors poured fresh flooring across the old sub-basement. During the process, one worker named Ruiz complained of heat rising from the slab, though ambient temperature was below freezing. He described hearing a rhythmic heartbeat beneath the steel mesh, steady and slow. Several others confirmed faint vibration through their boots. Records show the foreman halted work for an hour before continuing without report. That same week, Ruiz's wife claimed he woke nightly at exactly 3:06 a.m., sitting upright, counting softly from 1 to 6 before collapsing back asleep. He was later hospitalized for exhaustion, but discharged with no diagnosis. When questioned, he could recall only one phrase: "The nurse says it isn't over." At the decade's end, power failures plagued the lower floors. Electricians rewired entire circuits, yet voltage fluctuations returned precisely every 6 hours and 6 minutes. Logs record technicians hearing a woman's hum preceding each surge. When the hospital's East Wing was finally abandoned in 1979, the maintenance supervisor remarked, "It's quieter now, but sometimes the quiet feels like waiting." By 1982, the East Wing stood unused, its hallways dark except for security lights that buzzed faintly. The new hospital had grown around it, leaving the sealed foundation like a forgotten organ in a larger body. A maintenance guard named Harold Jensen began keeping notes about the place. His log described cold drafts rising from floor vents that no longer connected to active ducts. He wrote, "The air here smells like old gauze and something sweet. I hear counting sometimes, always stops at 6. He tried to trace the noise, following it through empty storerooms until it faded beneath the reinforced slab, marking the original Pavilion B site. Security dismissed his concerns, but when Jensen failed to clock out one morning, they found his flashlight lying in the corridor beam still on and a single line chalked on the wall beside it. "She's beneath." The handwriting matched his. Around this time, a graduate student from Northwestern, Emily Carr, undertook a thesis on medical ethics in early 20th century Chicago. She contacted the hospital seeking access to surviving documents from Bayard Holmes and Dr. Hayes, hoping to examine parallels between theoretical and practical experimentation. The administration reluctantly allowed limited review. Upon reading Mercer's remaining transcriptions, Carr became convinced the experiments described involved induced suspension of cellular activity. She hypothesized that Hayes had attempted to continue Holmes's early concepts of reanimation through chemical stasis. Carr later told a colleague she had discovered a ledger fragment listing the word caretaker under function, not staff. When she returned the next week, the folder was missing, and the clerk insisted no such ledger existed. She filed a complaint, and within a month withdrew from the program citing undue pressure from unknown parties. Her advisor noted she left behind only one note: "The caretaker is a process, not a person." Meanwhile, maintenance logs reveal recurring electrical disruptions localized to the sub-basement temperature sensors. Every recorded fluctuation followed the same sequence: 6 spikes in exact rhythm, each lasting 4 seconds. A visiting engineer from General Electric wrote in his summary, "If this is interference, it behaves like a pulse." When he attempted to trace the conduit source, he found a cable that ended abruptly inside solid concrete. Neither he nor his assistant could explain how current continued past the break. Later that evening, the assistant reported hearing a woman's voice near the transformer, whispering, "Count with me." He quit the next day without collecting pay. By 1985, urban explorers began breaking into the disused East Corridor to film local legends. Some footage recovered from that era shows static-filled imagery of peeling tiles and rusted signage marked Surgical Wing B. At the 3-minute mark, faint tapping sounds echo through the footage in groups of 6, followed by what appears to be a white shape crossing the far end of the hallway. Video analysts later argued it was merely light reflection, yet several viewers claimed to hear breathing layered beneath the hiss of the tape. The explorers reported finding an old brass tag half embedded in the wall engraved 43E. When they returned days later to show reporters, the corridor had been sealed with new concrete overnight. In 1989, the hospital's final report before privatization noted persistent temperature anomaly at east sublevel. The reading remained constant at 37 degrees, the approximate warmth of a living body. The technicians recalibrated twice, each result identical. The summary concluded, heat source unknown, assumed underground steam leak. But no steam lines existed there since 1930. The report was archived, then mysteriously removed during digital conversion years later. A rumor among older BAN staff said the deletion was requested from outside. By 1991, the hospital's East Foundation was officially decommissioned, a sealed wing that younger employees treated as legend and older ones avoided entirely. Yet night crews still spoke of the smell of ether wafting through the vents whenever thunderstorms rolled over the city. One janitor said he saw condensation forming on cold pipes as if the building itself were sweating fear. In that same year, an independent filmmaker named Ross Delaney sought permission to shoot a short documentary about abandoned medical facilities. He was denied access, but bribed a security guard to let him into the east sublevel after hours. The recovered transcript from his handheld recorder begins with idle narration about architecture, but soon turns nervous, Delaney whispering that he hears footsteps too slow to be echoes. At the 17-minute mark, he gasps, "There's a nurse's cap on the floor." Then silence. A week later, his equipment was found near a drain outside the hospital perimeter, its tape melted from exposure to heat. Delaney himself vanished. His family pressed for investigation, but police concluded accidental drowning in the Chicago River. His camera showed no water damage. During renovations in 1994, contractors removing obsolete wiring near the same sector unearthed a compact chamber barely larger than a closet. The interior walls were lined with scorched enamel tile, and what appeared to be a single surgical lamp fused to the ceiling. Written in soot on the far wall were the faint letters AM, again those initials of Adelaide Mercer. The chamber was photographed, then resealed after occupational safety deemed it contaminated. One worker later confessed he took a fragment of tile home as a souvenir. He returned it days later, claiming it throbbed with warmth. Tests found nothing abnormal except traces of old disinfectant. He refused to discuss it further and transferred to another site. The following. You're an article in the Chicago Medical Review revisited early 20th century ethical failures mentioning both Bayard Holmes and Milton Hayes. The piece summarized Holmes's cautionary stance that life prolonged without conscience yields only shadows of the living. Readers unfamiliar with the legend assumed it an abstract warning, while those inside the hospital took it as uncomfortably literal. One maintenance engineer pinned the article to his office wall with a note beneath, "She's not a shadow if she breathes." That same engineer filed a complaint about faint singing emanating from the sealed corridor during maintenance checks. A supervisor investigated but found only still air at normal temperature. As modernization advanced toward the decade's close, the East Wing was slated for demolition. A preliminary scan revealed structural voids inconsistent with building plans. One cavity measured precisely human-shaped. The demolition foreman, ignoring rumors, scheduled the blast for early morning. Just before detonation, the on-site sensors recorded 6 steady thuds beneath the concrete, too rhythmic to be seismic. The blast went ahead, but when dust settled, workers found a thin fissure in the remaining foundation, through which warm vapor escaped, smelling faintly of antiseptic. The area was poured over with new cement and paved for parking. In late 1999, a nurse walking to her car after night shift reported seeing a woman in antique uniform standing by the far fence, staring toward the hospital windows. When security approached, they found only an old brass pin embedded in the asphalt engraved with the initials AM. It was still warm to the touch, despite the snow. By 2003, the hospital had merged into a larger medical network, and the east parking lot built over the old Pavilion B foundation was used daily by hundreds of employees. None of them suspected the ground below held nearly a century of sealed corridors and forgotten files. Yet that spring, a series of electrical faults disrupted the new substation positioned exactly above the former operating theater. The technicians logged 6 voltage spikes, each occurring precisely 6 minutes apart. The pattern repeated every evening for 3 consecutive days before ceasing without intervention. The maintenance report labeled the cause untraceable oscillation. During the same week, 2 nurses from the night shift independently complained of hearing a woman humming through the intercom system despite it being disconnected for upgrades. Each described the tune as slow and soothing, like a lullaby from a very old gramophone. Audio engineers tested the lines and detected no transmissions, only a faint rhythmic pulse similar to human respiration. An archivist named Michael Sorensen, working on a centennial exhibit about the hospital's history, became intrigued by the scattered notes referencing Pavilion B. He discovered in a microfilm drawer a 1914 invoice for preservation agents signed by Dr. Milton Hayes and countersigned by an assistant with the initials A.M. Sorensen. Dug further and found a reference in the 1938 correspondence between Bayard Holmes and a county physician warning that one caretaker remains where duty was never discharged. He recognized the phrasing from later legends and decided to include a discrete section on the Mercer affair in his exhibit proposal. When the draft circulated internally, his supervisor ordered its removal, stating, "We don't feed ghosts." Days later, Sorensen's office caught fire from an overloaded socket, according to official explanation, yet the damage pattern formed a near-perfect rectangle centered on the Mercer documents untouched by flame. The papers were later reported missing from evidence storage. By 2006, construction crews excavating adjacent lots for a new wing exposed a cross-section of the old sub-basement wall. Beneath layers of concrete, they discovered metal conduit running deeper than expected, wires leading nowhere but still faintly warm to touch. The site engineer recorded electromagnetic fluctuations matching a pulse rate of 66 beats per minute. He joked it was the heartbeat of the hospital before ordering the conduit cut and sealed. That night, security cameras captured lights flickering across the parking area in 6-second intervals. The feed distorted, showing a silhouette moving between cars, then vanishing when the floodlights activated. Guards reviewing the tape later noted the timestamp froze for exactly 6 seconds during the distortion. A year later, a medical historian interviewing retired staff for an oral history project recorded an elderly orderly recalling a nurse who never left her post. He insisted her name was Mercer and that she kept watch over the quiet ones. When pressed, he smiled faintly and said, "You can still hear her counting if you wait long enough." The recording ended with a faint tap-tap sequence audible beneath the man's voice, 6 knocks measured evenly before static swallowed the sound. The historian archived the tape but avoided replaying it after noticing that the waveform displayed regular spikes at human breathing intervals. By 2009, the hospital administration sealed the East Lot's lower service tunnels after repeated reports of moisture corrosion and unexplained heat signatures. The final engineering log described temperatures inside the concrete exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit despite winter frost outside. The summary closed with one sentence typed in uppercase: "Source undetermined, possibly internal." By 2012, the modern hospital complex bore no visible trace of its early 20th century origins. Yet the site engineers still dealt with anomalies concentrated under the east parking structure where Pavilion B had once stood. Thermal scans commissioned for renovation showed a single hot spot roughly 6 feet across holding steady at 37 degrees C for weeks with no apparent source. When technicians drilled near it to install sensors, the temperature dropped instantly and a rush of pressurized air escaped, smelling faintly of iodine mixed with something sweet. Later that night, one worker awoke at home to find a bruise shaped like fingers around his wrist. He told colleagues he dreamed of a woman in an old nurse's uniform whispering, "Stay still." He quit the project the next day. Hospital administration ignored these incidents, but a local podcaster investigating Chicago's lost institutions released an episode titled The Evil Caretaker, 1914's Secret Ward. The host mentioned Bayard Holmes as the origin of Hayes's forbidden research and played a clip of ambient audio recorded near the east wall of the sub-basement. It contained 6 rhythmic pulses repeating every 20 seconds, too regular for machinery. Listeners reported headaches after playing it loud. The hospital's legal team sent takedown notices citing property rights. Still, mirror uploads spread online, reviving public fascination with the legend. People left candles and old medical tags by the fence at night, calling the act paying respect to Nurse Mercer. Security removed them daily, yet more appeared, always in groups of 6. That autumn, archivist Natalie Keene received authorization to digitize the last boxes of paper records before permanent storage. She found inside one envelope a photograph she couldn't place, an operating theater lit by gas lamps, shadows long, at center a woman in nurse attire standing slightly forward, holding a small box. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes seemed fixed beyond the camera. Keene scanned the image. Metadata from the scanner showed file creation time 3:06 a.m. The system hadn't been running then. She deleted it, only for the same file to reappear hours later labeled Caretaker JPG. The printout on her desk felt warm to the touch. By 2014, the centennial of Pavilion B's closing, the hospital prepared a formal remembrance exhibit. A brief mention of Bayard Holmes's medical contributions was included, but any reference to Milton Hayes or Adelaide Mercer was omitted. During setup, an intern reported hearing a faint lullaby echo through the HVAC ducts repeating 6 slow notes. Security footage shows display lights dimming for exactly 6 seconds at 3:06 a.m. No one was present. The following morning, staff found a brass key lying atop the exhibit glass engraved AM. No record exists of how it entered the sealed case. That winter, the maintenance crew recorded one final anomaly, a low-frequency vibration detected under the east foundation, accompanied by rising warmth through the floor tiles. Engineers described it as pulsing, like a slow breath. After 20 minutes, it ceased abruptly, leaving the concrete cold again. The reading stopped precisely at 3:06 a.m., 100 years to the minute from Nurse Mercer's last diary entry, according to surviving fragments. In the silence that followed, the security monitor captured faint static, forming a single word before the feed cut out. Present. By 2016, the Centennial exhibit had been quietly dismantled, and the artifacts boxed in climate-controlled storage, yet security logs began recording unexplained door activations in that archive room during off-hours. Alarm sensors registered brief openings at intervals of 6 minutes, though cameras showed no movement. The guard on duty described hearing a woman's heels clicking across tile, followed by the faint hiss of ether. The next morning he tendered resignation, stating, "Someone's still doing rounds." The boxes containing historical photos were inspected, and one labeled Mercer Collection appeared slightly open. Inside, curators found the old 1914 group photograph, newly smudged with a dark streak running across Dr. Hayes's face. A freelance journalist named Dana Kerr learned of the anomaly and decided to write a long-form article about the evil caretaker legend for an online magazine. She interviewed former staff who recounted decades of rumors, voices in air vents, odd warmth, unexplained counting. Some mentioned the name Bayard Holmes again, calling him the grandfather of life defiance. Kerr traced Holmes's public writings to a rare essay in which he warned that the soul follows the heart's pulse. If the pulse is stolen, the soul may wander. She quoted that line as epigraph for her piece and obtained limited access to the basement for photographs. With 2 colleagues, she entered the east corridor at night and recorded low-frequency audio. They captured 6 knocks, followed by what sounded like a faint intake of breath. One of the team collapsed from sudden nausea. The others carried him out. He later claimed he'd seen a woman standing behind Kerr, her face calm like a photograph. When the story went live, it garnered attention briefly before the site hosting it went offline without explanation. Backups of the article returned errors labeled file in use. In 2018, hospital redevelopment. Plans aim to replace the old east structures entirely with a research annex. While excavators cleared remaining concrete, a digger struck an iron surface, roughly rectangular, 3 feet wide. The operator described hearing hollow resonance like hitting an empty coffin. Supervisors halted work, but when ground-penetrating radar scanned the section, it registered an internal void emitting residual heat at body temperature. The site was covered overnight for safety. Yet the next morning the soil had settled several inches, as if something beneath had collapsed inward. No further excavation followed. The area was paved again by order of city inspectors. The construction manager later confided to a friend that he'd felt vibration through the cab controls. Steady, alive, almost like breathing. The hospital's new administration released a sanitized statement commemorating its long heritage of care, omitting mention of Pavilion B entirely. But employees in the new annex reported motion sensors triggering after hours with no intruders detected. The data logs always displayed the same pattern, 6 activations spaced evenly apart before returning to 0. Engineers joked about Mercer's patrol, but cleaners refused to work alone there at night. One said she found a small indentation on a supply room wall shaped like a hand pressed from the other side. When she touched it, the concrete felt faintly warm despite winter temperatures outside. She quit 2 days later. By 2020, the maintenance records ceased referring to anomalies altogether, as if erasure could bury history. The final entry before digital transition read, "System stable. All readings normal. Time 0306. No signature followed, only the note, record auto-entered." By 2022, the new research annex operated at full capacity, its laboratories gleaming with sterile light, its staff mostly unaware that their offices sat directly above the sealed ruins of Pavilion B. Only a handful of long-term maintenance workers remembered the stories, and they avoided discussing them aloud. One evening during a scheduled power test, the monitoring software logged a sudden draw of current from an inactive circuit buried under the east subfloor. The engineers traced the spike to a dead conduit line mapped decades earlier. They measured a repeating surge, 6 pulses, each 4 seconds apart, and then nothing. The team dismissed it as residual induction until a temperature alarm followed, registering 37 degrees C exactly. The senior technician made a note in the system log, pattern consistent with respiration. The line was deleted hours later by an unknown user ID. That same month, a security camera overlooking the corridor above the old foundation recorded brief fogging of the lens, though humidity sensors showed normal levels. When the feed was enhanced, a faint figure appeared reflected in the glass wall, a woman in outdated nurse's attire holding what seemed to be a box at waist height. Her face was indistinct, more shadow than flesh. The image lasted 6 seconds before vanishing. The guard reviewing the footage collapsed from a panic attack. He told paramedics he felt someone counting inside my chest. The incident was classified as stress reaction and not reported to press. Meanwhile, a historian named Dr. Claire Howden was compiling a digital timeline of Chicago's early hospitals for the city archives. She stumbled on a partial reference to Bayard Holmes's private correspondence, noting continuation beyond natural silence. Curiosity led her to cross-search Cook County records, where she found a single surviving payroll stub from 1914 listing A. Mercer, caretaker overtime. She read the discovery on a professional forum. Hours later, the post disappeared, and her account was suspended for metadata irregularities. She kept physical copies of her notes and stored them in a locked cabinet. The next morning, the cabinet was found open, contents missing, lock unbroken. On her office monitor blinked a message she swore she hadn't written. Still breathing. Throughout that year, Maintenance staff continued reporting short power flickers, always occurring at 3:06 a.m. When technicians ran diagnostics, they found no faults but noticed a soft humming audible through floor vents, faint yet unmistakably human. They recorded it once. The waveform displayed 6 distinct rises matching cardiac rhythm. When played back in slow motion, the sound resembled a woman exhaling between each count. Late that autumn, a night custodian walking the basement corridor near the East Service elevator claimed to hear footsteps behind her. She turned to see a pale figure in an old-style nurse's cap moving slowly toward the sealed wall. The woman raised a small metallic object resembling a box, then pressed it against the concrete. A thin line of condensation spread outward like breath on glass. The custodian fled, returning minutes later with a colleague, but the wall was dry and cold again. The report she filed was quietly removed from records. The only remnant was a handwritten copy left in her locker, ending with the words, "She wanted me to listen. She said 6 is enough." By year's end, the annex experienced one last unexplained outage lasting exactly 6 minutes. At restoration, all systems rebooted simultaneously, displaying the date 1914-05-12, the day Nurse Adelaide Mercer vanished from official history. By 2024, the story of Pavilion B existed only as a whisper among the oldest staff, half warning, half superstition. Yet subtle signs kept surfacing. The biometric scanners at the annex's east entrance began registering phantom logins between 3:05 and 3:07 a.m., 6 consecutive attempts each night from an employee ID long retired. The IT department blamed corrupted access data and wiped the entries, but they reappeared nightly under the same name, A. Mercer. The technicians joked about the ghost nurse signing in for her shift, until one morning the doors to the archive storage opened themselves exactly at that hour. Security footage showed no one in frame, only the reflection of light moving across the polished floor like the swing of a lamp. That spring, Dr. Claire Howden, still obsessed with the legend, petitioned for permission to examine the sealed substructure beneath the annex, claiming historical importance. Her request was denied. Yet 3 days later, she obtained an anonymous email containing blueprints of the 1914 hospital expansion. The attached message read, "The caretaker waits where the air is warm." Against advice, she accessed the sub-basement using maintenance tunnels. Her audio recorder, later found by custodial staff, captured 30 minutes of footsteps, then a faint counting voice repeating 1 through 6, followed by a sigh and a soft metallic scrape. The tape ended with a single whispered phrase, "You found the box." Howden was never seen again. The following week, an emergency inspection of the tunnels reported a newly formed cavity near the old foundation wall, as though something had pressed outward from below. The cavity measured roughly the dimensions of a coffin. Administrators sealed the area with reinforced panels, but the temperature sensors above continued to spike nightly at body heat range. 3 months later, an article appeared briefly on a local history website titled, "The Caretaker Case," reopened summarizing Howden's disappearance and linking it to the century-old mystery of Nurse Mercer. Within hours, the piece vanished, and the site domain redirected to the hospital's official homepage. The editor who posted it claimed later that his computer displayed a pop-up message before the deletion reading, "The shift continues." By autumn, construction crews installing fiber cables beneath the annex encountered a narrow void in the soil filled with dark, gel-like residue and fragments of rusted surgical metal. The site engineer documented the find, noting faint warmth rising from the cavity despite cold ground temperature. A supervisor ordered the section concreted immediately, but kept one object, a brass pin with the initials AM, as evidence. 2 days later, he suffered cardiac arrest while descending the service elevator. The pin was never recovered from his belongings. Near year's end, when a thunderstorm knocked out power across the campus, backup generators activated automatically. Yet the east wing remained dark for 6 full minutes before lights returned. At that moment, All internal monitors displayed the same line of text across status screens. Ward secured. Caretaker present. No staff member admitted typing it. The following morning, maintenance noted condensation along the east wall, spelling 6 distinct streaks, each roughly the width of a human hand, as though something inside had pressed gently outward and stopped. By early 2025, the annex functioned flawlessly by every measurable standard, yet unease settled over those who worked the night rotation. They spoke quietly of drafts that smelled faintly of antiseptic and of computer screens that dimmed for exactly 6 seconds before restoring themselves. Some described hearing a faint metronomic tick beneath the hum of fluorescent lights, always in groups of 6 beats, then silence. The facilities manager scheduled a complete systems audit. Technicians found nothing unusual except a constant electrical potential of 0.37 volts coursing through the reinforced foundation, too weak for machinery, yet steady as a heartbeat. When asked about its origin, one engineer muttered, "That's human voltage." The remark was stricken from the report. A month later, a team performing archival imaging of century-old X-ray plates noticed one labeled 43E flicker on the scanner as though backlit from within. The outline revealed not bones, but a blurred human figure in a nurse's uniform holding a box at waist height. The technicians assumed equipment malfunction until the light flickered 6 times and the plate shattered silently within its frame. Leading the review, Dr. Arnold Weber requested the imaging logs. They showed timestamps aligning exactly to 3:06 a.m., the same time recorded in earlier anomalies. The data file renamed itself Caretaker Active. AT specialists erased it, yet fragments later reappeared embedded across unrelated folders of the hospital's digital records, patient forms, security logs, lab schedules, each carrying a faint watermark reading A. Mercer. As spring approached, maintenance staff noticed a low vibration pulsing through the east corridor floor like a slow breathing sound. The hospital chaplain was asked to bless the site out of respect for superstition. He sprinkled holy water along the wall and recited quietly. For 6 seconds the temperature rose from 60 to 98 degrees before settling again. His notes read simply, "She heard." That same night, sensors in the generator room detected rhythmic current surges forming a waveform identical to human cardiac rhythm, lasting 6 minutes and ceasing without cause. In June, a young nurse named Evelyn Grant entered the annex early for her shift. She took the east stairwell alone and later told colleagues she saw a woman ahead of her in antique uniform walking slowly toward the end of the corridor. Thinking it a reenactment volunteer, Evelyn called out, but the woman didn't turn. The figure reached the sealed wall and faded into it, leaving behind a faint metallic scent. Evelyn's ID badge later registered an additional swipe logged at 3:06, though she had entered at 3:10. Her co-workers told her not to speak of it. She transferred soon after. The annex remains operational today, its east wing permanently restricted. The administration insists that temperature variations and sensor errors stem from legacy wiring, yet the logs still show nightly fluctuations aligning with the century-old pattern. 6 intervals, 6 pulses, then calm. Security rounds pass that corridor quickly, never lingering. Long after staff leave, when the building is silent, those who live nearby claim they can see a dim glow under the pavement on rainy nights and hear a faint woman's voice counting softly before fading into the wind off Lake Michigan. And so the record closes, unresolved, breathing still beneath Chicago's cold ground, a caretaker who never left her ward.